I am Jen Hawkins.
And I am Andy Fenn.
And this is
the Jen and Fenn podcast.
Every time I hear that, it's a great piece of music. I'm assuming royalty-free music.
Yes, absolutely.
A joy. So this is the last of the 2021 mentions.
Yes.
Sort of a wash-up episode, mop-up for everything that we didn't feel could justify its own hour.
Yes.
And probably touch on the things that we're most looking for. Well, there'll be some dishonourable mentions in there as well, and what we're looking forward to in 2022.
Well, that'll be the next episode.
Okay.
I'm going to do it as 2 episodes.
Fair enough.
We need to start stretching this shit out.
That's fair, yeah. So 2022, there'll be just a bit of a mix of what to look forward to. I mean, we've already hit the ground running.
The thing is, the stuff on my list for 2022, we've got most of it already. I've finished one of them.
Well, I am absolutely up to my tits in one of them already, which is, I'm dying to talk about it. So, that will be which is Cyberpunk 2077.
Yes, the PS5 rendition.
Which is just, I don't know. I loved the game the first time I played it, but I actually think, now I would go as far as say, I think this is one of my favourite things I've played for a very, very long time.
Lovely.
And in the last couple of years as a new game, I love it. So, 2021 mop up. We've made a small list of things we played in 2021.
Well, yes, because we were conscious of the fact that we've done 3 episodes so far, all on one game, and the number of tangents we've gone off on.
This is true.
So when we're talking about several games, it's a recipe for disaster. So we've
got a list.
We've got a little bit of a skeleton here.
We've got a list and a bit of discipline. So it's all the stuff that we didn't think we could justify its own episode. So we just sort of come in and just have a little chat about all the lovely things that we played. So you probably played more of the 2021 releases than I did, because I was quite frugal last year.
Yeah, you said that in another episode, didn't you? You were like, I wasn't really bothered about anything, so I just didn't buy it. That was
the thing. And it's more just because I think, because PS5, the barrier of entry on pricing now with PS5 is so high that I'm like, if I'm not fussed about it, I'm not going to jump in straight away.
I've always been far more impulsive when it comes to buying games. Let's be real. I'll be like, that looks moderately good.
I can be if I'm not playing anything else, but I think that's the thing. I had so much that I was still playing last year that I just didn't feel the need to jump in with anything new. I think that's a testament to the quality of the games that did come out last year.
We did the episodes on Hitman and Mass Effect, and those were the 2 games that really kind of kept you fed.
Yeah, and then towards the end of the year was when I jumped in with Final Fantasy XIV. So I just had no reason to... Yeah, there was no reason to buy anything new because I didn't really have the time to spare in my schedule, so...
See, I make time.
You make time.
I make time and I magic money out of thin air. I just pull money out of my ass and I'm like...
Which is, an admirable quality.
£60 for this game that I don't know if I'll even play or like.
On release?
Or,
no, why not? Why not? It's keeping the industry aflood.
And I literally am.
Yeah,
I'm
single-handedly. Yeah, single-handedly keeping the lights on a lot of these games.
And the thing is, it's 99% digital as well. So
doing the Lord's
shit, then I can't even get rid of it. I am better at that. That was one of my New Year's resolutions, actually, was to start buying more stuff on disc.
And we did discoverbase.com
We did discoverbase.com. Other retailers are available, but not as cheap as this.
And we're not above whoring out for sponsorship.
Absolutely not.
Let it be said. So, the first on the list then, I think yours is probably the one that's worth jumping in first, as it's on top on the list.
Well, I just kind of listed them in chronological order, really, mainly. But the first one on my list is Persona 5 Strikers.
Yeah.
Which I didn't know what to expect from it because I think it's pronounced Muso, the genre.
Right.
So obviously we had Persona 5 and then we had Persona 5 Royal.
So Persona 5 is a sort of a JRPG.
Persona 5 is a very, I don't want to say typical because I don't think it's typical at all, but it's a...
But it is a JRPG.
It's a JRPG. It? Yeah. It's turn-based RPG, which will be immediately familiar to anyone who's played a sort of a classic Final Fantasy game and whatnot.
Very distinctive, beautiful art style.
Very stylistic, very slick in terms of its gameplay, but for all intents and purposes, it's a JRPG. And then Persona 5 Royal, as they do with the Persona games, is just an expanded version of Persona 5.
So is that like a Game of the Year version then, or is it totally new content? It's not just an amalgamation of DLC?
The original Persona 5 game,
yeah.
But then when that game finishes, there's another chapter that follows on afterwards.
Okay.
So
okay, and is this content available as like DLC or anything? Oh right, okay. So you have to play.
it's an entirely new version, just with an extra.
Fair. Which is wild, considering how big I understand that game to be.
This is the only problem, I think, with it, is that you couldn't just jump into the extra bit.
No, because it's a monstrous game. As I say, a friend of mine was playing it and was playing for the best part of 18 months, I think. I don't think it'd be an exaggeration to say.
It's a time commitment for sure. But whereas Royal is just an expansion of the original game, Strikers is a follow-up to it.
Okay.
So it's all the same characters, a couple of newbies. It's bizarrely actually a follow-up to the original Persona 5 and not the Royal version.
Okay.
So the new characters that were introduced in Royal don't feature in Strikers. Not really sure why that is. That was a bit of a choice because the new characters were very good. But
may have just ended up regretting their choices.
Maybe.
Who knows?
But yeah, Strikers is a muso. I think that's how you say it.
What does that mean? Tell me.
You know Dynasty Warriors?
Yes.
So it's like that.
Oh, okay.
So it's real-time combat with shitloads of enemies on the screen all at the same time.
Now, I haven't played Dynasty Warriors in decades.
I've never really played it.
I played a couple of them on PS1 when it was PS1 they started on, wasn't it?
Yes.
Or PS2. I remember very distinctly getting a demo with a magazine for it and being very intrigued by it and just enjoying farting around on this demo because that's all it was. And then I think I picked up one of them quite cheap off the back of that and just had fun
I just remember being on a horse with a big spear and just hitting a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it was just, I think for me at the time, it was almost just the novelty of the sense of scope to the game. There wasn't a lot to it, but it was the idea.
It's almost a miracle that they actually managed to get a game like that running on such old hardware. Well,
that's what I'm thinking. That's why I'm sat thinking, was it PS1?
I'm like, how is that even possible?
But it must have been. But yeah, that was a, so Dynasty, that's okay. So how does the JRPG element fit into the Muso thing then?
I mean, you've still got the usual kind of leveling up and all that stuff, but it is a very different game to the original Persona 5. It's just kind of a continuation of the story with the same group of characters, which are fantastic. That's really the only reason why I picked it up. The genre doesn't appeal to me in any way, but I so fell in love with the world and the characters that I was like, I just need to know how
you
this
loved
carries
Persona
on.
5. I remember us
absolutely lived for it.
Yeah. To be honest, I don't know anybody that had a bad word to say about Persona 5. If you were into those kinds of games, it was a real highlight of a generation, arguably, I would say.
Yeah.
Because did it come out on PlayStation 4 originally?
3. The original version came out on 3.
Shit.
And then they ported it to the PS4, I think about a year later.
And they are Sony games, aren't they? By merit of being Japanese. I don't think they're on Xbox, are they?
Oh, no, they're absolutely not on Xbox.
They're probably on PC, I would imagine, but they're...
there's some on PC, there's some on Switch. Strikers is on both
Nintendo
PC and
would
Switch.
Be on,
but the original Persona 5 is Sony exclusive.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I don't remember anybody having a bad word to say about it, and I remember it genuinely being a generation highlight for everybody.
It was a moment, yeah. I'm not going to pretend it's anywhere near as good as the original, but it was just a fun follow-up.
It's just a bit more of what you loved the first time.
Just a nice little side salad follow-up to, check back in with the characters and see what they're up to, really.
Where are they taking it from here? Are they doing any more Persona games? Or?
Yeah.
Am I right in thinking that the other ones, you can get them on handheld?
Persona 4 Golden was on the Vita.
Yeah.
And that was like the Royal version of Persona 4.
That's the one I'm thinking of, because I remember as I say, the same friend was playing those on Vita
as well, yeah. It was kind of a Vita seller.
I think it was, to be honest.
You couldn't get it anywhere else. The original Persona 4 was on PS2, and then they did the Golden expanded version for Vita. That's now on PC, but it only came out on PC like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So it was exclusive to the Vita for a really, really long time. And then I think you can get two expanded versions of 2 and 3 on PSP.
Blimey, okay.
But apart from that, it's PS1, PS2 for the OG versions.
Fair enough. So like most long-running Japanese franchises, they run for a very, very long time, to be fair.
And there's always a big gap between them.
Yeah, and there doesn't seem to be any sign of it stopping, because I would think we probably will make another one off the back of the success of this one.
How can they not?
Well, quite, yeah. There's people interested, there's people who'll pay, and if they can keep that up, then why wouldn't you?
But Persona is actually an offshoot of, I don't know if you've heard of it, Shin Megami Tensei.
I do know that name, but I don't tend to understand why.
Another long-running RPG that's been on all sorts, again, mainly Sony consoles.
I find it quite fascinating that there is this whole entire subculture of just distinctly Japanese games. Yeah. If you're into it, then it's just a well of games you can dink it. Some of them don't even export outside of Japan, as I understand it.
The amount of times I go on to a PlayStation Store sale, and there's all these random.
Well, I do. I look at it and I think I wouldn't even know what to do with it. Like, it just doesn't register. But then I think there's a whole other. It's almost like it's gaming's equivalent of Hollywood in Japan. Yeah. They've just got their own thing that only they do, and a very specific niche of people are into them and buy them.
And they're not all good. There's some shite.
Oh, I've got no doubt about it. Absolutely, I mean, some of them are just filth, aren't they? They're some of them exist just for a bit of boob bouncing and a bit of
I mean, to be fair, that was going on to the PlayStation Store and kind of perusing the sales was how I got into the Atelier franchise.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. If you're into it, I suppose there's just a wealth to draw from, because I do know some people who do play those games, and they've sort of started by dipping their toe in the water with something, and then just started to take a punt on these other games when sales have started. Yeah, and it's just, in true sort of JRPG fashion, they last. They're long games.
They're long games. You get a lot of value for money, and some of them are really, really fantastic.
I remember very specifically, I wanted to play it, but I couldn't quite get into it. But it was because I was Ni no Kuni.
Oh, Ni no Kuni!
And I wanted it because I really love. I never know. It's
Studio Ghibli.
Studio Ghibli or Studio Ghibli. I'm never sure which one. I say Ghibli.
I think it's Ghibli.
I think so because Ghibli sounds too much like giblets. Yeah. So I say Ghibli. If it's wrong, I apologise.
It's GH, isn't it?
Yeah.
GHIBLI.
Yeah, I think it depends who you talk to, but giblet, I'm not happy with.
It's like the people that pronounce GIF.
Yes,
that's a bathroom cleaner.
Yeah, and GIF is just wrong. I've never, when I do meet those people, I'm always like, okay. But yeah, something like Ni no Kuni. I've always been, because I love those Studio Ghibli films and I love the look of them, but I think they're just something I love to watch other people play with competence and elegance and giving it everything it deserves.
I played Ni no Kuni on PS3.
Yes, they did a sequel, didn't they?
They did do a sequel.
Yeah.
And the first one's since been remastered for PS4 as well.
Oh, okay.
I didn't play a massive amount of it. I think I probably played about 10 hours.
I remember you playing it and enjoying it, though.
In that 10 hours, it just broke me.
It was a joy.
In all good ways. Do you remember Drippy?
Vaguely.
The thing with the lantern hanging off his nose. It's
yes,
like a little stuffed toy. And every time he was on the screen, I was like, I feel like something bad's going to happen to Drippy.
And he must be protected at all costs.
And he must be protected at all costs. And I think that's why I turned the game off. I was like,
I can't bear to see something dreadful. So it didn't finish Ni no Kuni because just in case the ending was sad.
That's not a spoiler because I don't know.
I don't know. But none of us know. We just don't want to. In our mind, he just had a lovely time. And I
had a very similar experience actually with Atelier Ryza 2. There was a Drippy-esque.
It's a testament to these characters that they create, though, isn't it? That you become so attached to that the idea of as anything happening to them is just
it's like that meme. If anything happens to him, I'll kill everyone in this room and then myself.
Yeah, quite. And to be honest, that's very much the emotions I've been going through playing Cyberpunk again.
Yeah.
Again, come back to that one, but yeah, that's very much the feeling I've got playing Cyberpunk again, because I've realised just how much the technical limitations of playing it the first time actually hampered how far into the game I got. I finished it.
And you're uncovering all of this fantastic stuff.
This feels like I'm playing it again for the first time, and it's remarkable how attached you get to some of these characters. Yeah. And this game, and it's brutal. It's savagely dark and brutal with everyone. We won't say any more for now.
No.
But yeah, that feeling, so I can completely relate to that feeling, and you just think, but that's the testament to quality of writing and characterization. And
I mean, if those Studio Ghibli films tug on your heartstrings at all, just looking at the art is enough.
Well, that's kind of what I got, because I think I want to say I watched you play it a couple of times because I was interested in the art style. But yeah, I mean, some of those Studio Ghibli films are terribly depressing in that respect anyway. So have you ever seen Grave of the Fireflies?
No.
What's
the one with the horse?
Horse. I can't remember which one the horse is actually, but Grave of the Fireflies is about two children trying to survive World War II. And it's
yes, I know the one you're talking about.
It's a really harrowing for a cartoon. A cartoon has no business being So yeah, moving on to the next game then. I suppose I'll do one of mine because I think your list is probably a bit longer than mine. So mine is an indie, a tiny little indie game that I took a punt on. Is a game called Lacuna. Have you ever played it?
No.
It's a very old sort of retro art style.
Okay.
Side-scrolling cyberpunk noir detective thriller.
Okay.
So you play a detective who works for this. It's like an intelligence agency, and the backstory of this world is that you've got these several different planets that are colonized by people, and it's all under sort of the umbrella of one sort of central planetary system. So you've got this idea, just the kind of the idea of colonialism, and then you've got these feuds on these planets where people are trying to claim independence from this overreaching power. And there's this large mining planet which sort of befell a tragedy years ago, which was then used as an excuse to further subjugate this native people, to say that they couldn't be trusted to, So there's that going on. And it's this, it starts as you play this detective, naturally in true noir style. He has a bit of a troubled past. He has issues with his family and all this kind of a thing.
Drinker.
Yep. You can literally, it knows its audience. You can literally, in certain points of the game, walk over to certain areas, usually balconies with these really brooding vistas. You can push the circle button and he'll just light up. And for a moment, he'll just smoke and look out into the void while this lovely Blade Runner-esque soundtrack plays. It's brilliant and like catnip to me. And what happens is the story's kicked off by a diplomat from one of these planets comes to visit. And it's the idea is there's these negotiations going on to claim independence for one of these planets. This diplomat is then subsequently assassinated.
Right.
And you then are spending the rest of the game just going and trying to solve this murder mystery.
Okay.
And it's very simplistic in the sense that you are just going to these locations and you're using you're looking for certain points, clicking them. So you've got that piece of evidence, you've got that piece of evidence.
It's a bit CSI-ish.
Yeah, exactly that. But it's very simplistic, very sort of side-scrolling. You've got to look at and collect your evidence, and then you've got to submit what's called a sheet. So you've got to declare your answers for who you think did what, blah, 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 and then submit it to your superior to see if you're correct. And it's possible to completely fuck the whole thing up.
Oh, wow, okay.
And you've got to interview characters and see who can figure out who's lying. It's very, very simplistic style, but it's probably one of the best things I've played for ages.
That sounds great.
It's great. I would really give it a go. I'm pretty certain it's on PC, and it's the PlayStation port that's come out at the end of 2021.
Okay.
And I picked it up in a sale for a couple of quid because I just wasn't really playing anything, and I just fancied a bit of a break from everything I was playing. And it's probably about, I would say, maybe about between 5 to 8 hours.
Oh, that's lovely.
And it's just a really nice little palate cleanser of a game. And if you're into noir, sci-fi stuff, detective thrillers, kind of point and click adventure games, it's brilliant. And I would really recommend picking it up because it's buttons. Like I picked it up in a sale, but I'm pretty sure retail, it's no more than a tenner, if it's even that.
I love that. You do get into these things, don't you, where it's like, I think particularly at this point in the, this is March 2022, and we're being besieged by quality AAA releases, and you do get to a point where you just burn out on that style of game.
I think that's precisely what happened to me. Like I was
I just
so
want
much,
a little,
just a small thing. And the other one, this one came out in 2021, but I played this in 2020. In 2020, but I played it in 2021. It's a similar thing, and it's called Cloudpunk. Did you ever play Cloudpunk?
No, but I remember you telling me about it.
I fell in love with Cloudpunk. It's just you in this little car. And what it just, and there's a company called Cloudpunk that you're doing deliveries for. And it's this dystopian sort of, again, cyberpunk future where there's kind of corporations run everything. There's a very sort of limited sense of morality overall.
Okay.
So you could be, there's one point in the game where you deliver a package and you suspect there's something untowards with this package. You drop it off at the location, and then you're driving around a bit later, and then you hear that the location you dropped the package off has exploded. So you just delivered a bomb for a client, but you didn't know what you were doing.
Right.
And it's very much, don't ask questions, don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
But the whole game is basically just you in this car, and you've got a dog, an AI, who you can't afford to have a body for anymore. So you're saving up money so you can buy a new robot body for your dog.
Oh, I love that.
And you plug your little dog into the car. So you're just buzzing around, picking up your packages with your little dog chatting to you. Because he does chat. He's got a proper, having a good little chat with you. And then you've got the guy who gives you your delivery missions, who again is a really lovely old guy, and he's very grizzled by what he does. He's like, look, it's always easier if you just don't ask questions, this kind of thing.
We live in a morally grey world, so just get on with it.
100%. And then this other thread sort of starts to come into place, which is about an AI which is in control of the whole city, and the city is kind of, for some reason, nobody knows why, is starting to implode on itself. The infrastructure's starting to die. And it's because this rogue AI is effectively it's imprisoned almost, is starting to fight back.
Right.
So it's causing things like gas mains to explode for no reason, just out of,
This is a very common theme.
Very common
in games at the moment.
100%. And that's it. It's just, and it's all just clicks into that very not stereotypical, because that makes it sound trite, but those sort of staple themes you get in those cyberpunk dystopian futures.
Yeah.
And it's just, but Cloudpunk is beautiful. Everything about Cloudpunk is gorgeous. Again,
as soon as you said AI dog, I was like, sold.
It's a retro style game, and it's just very colourful, and you're just driving through.
I looked it up when you mentioned it to me before. I looked it up, and I thought, that does look stunning.
So between Lacuna and Cloudpunk, those two things were a perfect palate cleanser for me at the end of last year, and I had a blast with both of them, and I would thoroughly recommend picking them up. They're both very cheap, and I'm pretty certain Cloudpunk is now available on the Nintendo Switch as well.
Oh, lovely.
Which I think is also is a perfect little format for it.
So. Yeah. Well, I'm sure it will come at some point. I will get into that mood where I'm just like, you can keep your AAA 60 quid.
Yeah.
I'm not interested. I'm going to have a month where I just play little light bites like that.
Well, that's what I do. And that's, again, another one of the mentions on my list is going to be the Vampire the Masquerade games.
Yes.
Tiny little point and click story. They're interactive novels is probably what I would call them. There's the Coteries of New York, and then there's another one which I will need to check the name of, but there's two of those. Again, about 3 to 4 hours of gameplay.
Lovely.
Just burning through some lovely artwork. You get to make some choices that affect your endings and things like that. So I was just peppering those in amongst the AAA stuff that I was burning through last year.
Those games
really
are always
refreshing.
Those games are always made with such love as well.
That's the thing. They're real passion projects.
Yeah.
And the indie projects, because they haven't got a massive budget and all this kind of thing. So they just make everything they can to make these games as gorgeous and as lovely as possible.
Yeah.
So peppering those in amongst Mass Effect, Hitman, and everything else we played last year. It was lovely. So indies were really a highlight for me last year.
Okay. But you've always been a very big indie fan, haven't you?
I've certain things for sure. Like it's something I've always liked to take a punt on, just because I just think there's a lot of talent in the indie market. It's amazing what one person can do with a computer and the passion and the time, and all small teams can do. And I think that's just lovely. There's something about it. It's just something. It reminds me of the games I used to play when I was really young on the Mega Drive, for example.
Yeah.
Side scrollers.
I love a side scroller.
It's just a perfect, fun, creative little medium, and I love it. And I was saying, indies I've always will take a punt on 100%. I really do like them, especially retro indies, the ones that go for sort of the retro vibe when they do it well, like the other Super Meat Boy and things like that. When those games came out, I loved those as well. And what's it called, The Binding of Isaac, which is another one. Just all those kinds of games throughout the last few years, I've just been I've gotten really, really into those. So it's mostly indies for me for 2021. And next on your list is...
Next on my list would be Returnal.
So, this is one that I really do want to play and still haven't got round to.
Yeah.
But I'm familiar with how it works, and I have had a brief go on it just for the purposes of this. So,
I mean, to be honest with you, it's just a third-person Metroid, and I am so into it.
And it's hard as balls, as I
hard
understand.
As balls. They have release patches that kind of make the save system a little bit kinder, but it's still not. It's still very much designed to be, you will play this in one go.
But in the same vein as the Souls games, that's what these people play these games for. They want the challenge.
Exactly.
And people ate up Returnal. It really did it got great reviews, and a lot of people bought it.
Absolutely. It's an interesting premise, narrative premise from the word go, because you are this woman who kind of crashes onto this planet in a spaceship and then dies within the first 5 minutes. But then she wakes up and it's like a cycle. Every time she dies, she wakes back up in the ship.
It's kind of like Groundhog Day then.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Space age Groundhog Day.
So she's her mission is to figure out why this is happening to her.
Which actually bleeds into another honourable mention, which is Deathloop, because that's pretty much the same premise as Deathloop.
It's
more
exactly
or less.
I didn't even think of that.
Deathloop is a lot more light-hearted, and it takes a sort of what's the word I'm looking for, kind of a grindhouse comedy approach to it. But Returnal plays it very straight. It's a very sort of straight sci-fi game, as I understand it.
And the atmosphere is just...
Well, it looks beautiful.
It feels suffocating in certain ways, but then everything is just so stunning to look at.
But then you get these bonkers bursts of colour from the weapons and stuff, don't you? So you get these
again, that's what reminds me of Metroid.
Yeah, you get these brooding kind of space age settings, and then you just get these blasts of colour, because everything's got... It kind of reminded me a bit... Did you ever play that little indie game on the PS4 right at launch? It was called Resogun.
Yes.
It was like, so it was kind of dark and it was space, and then there would just suddenly be all this bonkers flashing shit going on the screen. It reminded me of that. So
it's just eye candy.
100%. It's just all spectacle. Everything about it just looks gorgeous.
But the other thing is that the shooting, the combat it just feels great.
It's very tight.
Do you know what I mean?
It's been fine-tuned.
When you get into the combat in a game and it just feels fantastic. You can't really put your finger on why.
Because if they're going to make a game as hard as that, it's the same as Souls. If you're going to make a game where the whole premise is mastering the mechanics and so that you can meet the challenge, the mechanics have to be polished to a mirror sheen.
They have to work and it has to feel good.
Yeah, it has to feel good and it has to work, because otherwise you're not respecting your audience in the sense of the people who will put the time in to master this and do it well. You have to give them the tools to work with. And I think Returnal, from what I did play of it, definitely did that, and it's one I really do want to pick up when the price is right.
And I'll tell you something, it's probably one of the best, if not the best, uses of things like the 3D audio, the haptic feedback on and the resistant, the adaptive triggers.
Yeah.
Everything they could possibly harness through the PS5. That's why it's exclusive.
Yes.
Because, they could port it to the Xbox, but you wouldn't have that entire layer, extra layer of.
Well, it's been very much made
stuff
with the PlayStation's hardware in mind, hasn't it? So, it's very much, which I appreciate, and that's something I think does give PS5 an edge on Xbox this generation. When games are made for it, it's really making the most of that controller. Because everyone knows Xbox is sort of even Xbox come out and said the DualSense controller is phenomenal. Yeah. And Xbox probably will look to integrate that technology at some stage of the game, 100%. And they'll say that it's a piece of it's a technical marvel. It's a brilliant piece of software.
I mean, you can look at
hardware.
You can look at multi-format games, and many of them on a technical level, in terms of graphics and frame rate and whatnot, are better on the Xbox. But to get that, you forego.
Yeah, these
extras. Yeah, and they don't 100%. Sound like a lot on paper.
Well, they don't, but I was still completely blown away by them when I first picked up my PS5.
I remember when I first loaded up Demon Souls on PS5. It was the only game I got with my PS5. And that opening scene where your character kind of steps through there's like a pond he's on or something.
Yes.
He's walking along, and as with every footstep, the controller is rumbling, and I was
mine was the same with Village, which we will come to shortly, because that was the first thing I played on my PS5 when I got it, and I couldn't believe the triggers when you were firing guns.
Yeah,
the differences between shooting a pistol and a sniper rifle or a shotgun and something else, or hitting walls and getting resistance against walls because the weapon couldn't go further. It was just insane. I still don't completely understand how it works.
No,
how the controller is programmed to understand that it's insane, and it's so clever. But so that's another one, Returnal, which is one, as I said, that's definitely one I want to jump into properly.
And actually, while we're on the subject of Returnal being like Metroid, I actually very much enjoyed Metroid Dread on the Switch.
That got rave reviews as well.
It was absolutely fantastic. And again, that goes back to what we were talking about with your indie faves. Love a side-scroller.
Yeah. And again, that game is another one that I heard so many people describe as just, it was refreshing. It was a breath of fresh air. It was just a really competent, brilliantly made Metroid game.
Yeah.
That came out just at the right time, and it was just long enough to sort of satiate or scratch that itch.
Everybody I know, scary.
Everyone I know who played it said it was fantastic.
You know what I'm like with being chased in games?
Oh.
This is a game where you are chased.
There's a lot of chasing.
Constantly.
I have seen that on a Twitch stream, actually. I know exactly the bit that you're... Is there a very large enemy of some description chasing you across? Yeah, I have. I've seen... Because I watched someone pretty much stream it on Twitch because I haven't got a Switch, so I wouldn't be able to play it myself. And everyone just had a blast with it.
Yeah. You basically have to track down these horrible enemies that will just chase you relentlessly.
You must have been a nervous wreck playing.
I was... Oh my God. I don't
Absolute
like
mess.
It. Don't like it.
But yeah, that's another one that was very, very popular. Yeah. And that was quite a late addition to 2021, wasn't it?
October?
Yeah, it was sort of Christmassy time. It was out for Christmas release schedule anyway.
Yeah.
That was another highlight for anyone who had a Switch. As I say, I am sort of still flirting with the idea of getting a Switch, so if I do have one,
it's a great piece of kit.
I'd get a Switch Lite if I had one, though, to be honest. I probably would never use it as a docked console.
Say that, but some games don't translate massively well to the handheld.
Okay.
There are some games that are clearly very much designed to be played in dock mode with a proper controller. So, and to be honest, the price differential between the Lite and the full fat one,
it is a difference of maybe like £30-40.
It's not a huge amount.
It's not much. So stay tuned. I may pick that up. But that was one I was interested in if I did get a Switch.
I'm not a Nintendo kid.
No, neither am I. I'm really not.
I do like my Switch.
The only handheld I've ever owned with any sort of gusto was the old
Vita.
Game Boys and then the PlayStation Vita, which I still love. I still have it and still use it. While we're touching on that, because we mentioned it, Deathloop.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, sort of similar premise, which was that's one, again, I need to really go back into and play properly. But that's Arcane's latest offering. We talked about this before, didn't we? That you and I have never felt that we totally tapped into the Arcane hype.
No. So they did Dishonored.
Yeah, which were games I tried really hard to get into. Again, another one I tried to get into.
Didn't really do it for me. And I will, full disclosure, Deathloop also is not really... I probably just haven't played it enough, but my early impressions of it were very middling. So...
Yeah. I mean, it's one that I fully intend to go back into. The thing that got me with Deathloop, probably more than anything else, was the humour of it.
It's a very
the
funny
script
game.
And the characters and the overall premise, I think, are very interesting, and it's a very funny game from what I have played of it. But I don't know, I feel like I'm missing out something on that Arcane flavour. Yeah. There's something very distinctive about it. But I will say, of all the Arcane games I've played, I think Deathloop was the most technically competent. The shooting and everything else in it was probably the best it's ever been. So...
Yeah, I'm not on the Arcane train.
No, me neither, to be honest with you. And I think it's a shame, but Deathloop is definitely one I would like to jump back into at some time. And that, again, that was another one that got rave reviews.
Yes,
and everyone,
it really did.
I didn't hear a bad word about it.
No.
It was either some people were a bit like us in that I can see why this is really good, and or it was just they loved it and couldn't stop playing it for ages.
It's literal perfection.
Yeah, literally that. The next one on the list is one I think that only I have played so far.
Yeah, I bought it. I'm yet to play it.
The PlayStation 5 upgrade of Hideo Kojima's Death Stranding. So this is an interesting one because did you play Death Stranding?
No.
No, this is curious.
I've owned it for years.
I remember you buying it and I could never remember whether you actually
never played it.
I
fully intend to, because there's something, and obviously this is based on my very limited understanding of the game and what it entails, but there's something very compelling and comforting.
I found it very therapeutic.
About a game where it's just monotonous and 100%. You're just kind of doing nothing in particular.
Very therapeutic. Death Stranding is one I almost feel like I could do a whole episode on, but I'll try and keep it brief. It's simultaneously, I think, a very, very, very good game. It's got Kojima's handprints all over it. The one thing I will say for it, I think, as a broad stroke, is I think it's proof, if ever anyone needed, that man does need an aggressive editor behind him. And that's not necessarily a criticism, but Death Stranding is what happens when you let Kojima off the leash. And it does go quite mad. A lot of it is utterly bonkers. And you could probably shorten the game to some extent, because there is a section in the middle which just feels completely unnecessary. It's unnecessary drudgery, and it's not particularly fun, to be honest. But the PlayStation 5 upgrade of Death Stranding is probably the most fun I've ever had with Death Stranding, because I only ever played it once on PS4, and I did enjoy it. But the PlayStation 5 version, just something about going back, because it came at a timely time when I kind of was getting to the end of 2021, where I felt like I'd kind of had my fill of the games I had been playing in that year.
It's a huge change of pace from games in general.
It was a perfect winter indoorsy game. The summer had wound down. You were indoors on a dark night with not much to do. So you were just bumming around delivering your packages and trying to follow this semblance of this batshit story that's going on in the background. And the visual upgrade on the PlayStation 5 is stunning. There's no two ways about it. The haptic feedback, again, is another huge part of the new experience.
Just another layer of
you have to, for anyone who's played it, you have to hold the shoulder triggers to keep the packages on your back safe. So you can't run around everywhere. You'll just fall over and everything will break. So you hold the two triggers to keep the pack steady on your back. You get levels of resistance with these new triggers now, depending on what terrain that you're on.
Okay.
And obviously the sound from your BB, which is the baby, which will tell you when BTs are nearby. So it's quite there with you. I don't know if it did on the PS4.
I would imagine it would have done, because
I can't remember,
or I think controller had a speaker.
It did, but I can't really remember. But it stuck out more to me this time. I'm not sure why. So the controller was another big plus with Death Stranding. I did play some of the additional modes that were added to it. I don't know if I necessarily think they were necessary.
Okay.
Some of it was just a bit... I mean, to call it a director's cut, I think, is firstly a stupid thing to call it. There was literally nothing that Kojima left on the cutting floor the first time.
This is what confused me about the fact that I was like, they're adding more to it.
It should have just been called an expanded edition. Like, you're not telling me for a second that Hideo Kojima left out car racing from his game.
No.
He deliberately designed this game to be completely uncompetitive and non-confrontational. The whole idea was the idea that you would deliver materials to these hubs to build roads, which then make it easier for you to travel around the terrain. But you can't see other people, but you'll come back to these hubs and more materials have been added to them. And then you add to them. And then the same as the bridges, you can put bridges over between two peaks so that you can cross easily. Other people's bridges, ropes, and ladders are in the game. So there is an element of multiplayer without there being any multiplayer. You don't ever see the other players, but you see what they leave behind for you. So it's this idea of this very cooperative environment whereby you're trying to constantly, you're leaving things behind to make things easier for other people.
Yeah.
So the thread of it is all about coming together and, building everything together and, rebuilding America and bringing the people together. So yeah, it's so I'm not sure those modes were necessary to be honest, but I really loved going back and playing Death Stranding again. I think playing it this time, it just again came across a completely timely point where I was just about finished with everything else. So I had a couple of weeks where it was cold weather, not going anywhere, just having a couple of evenings to just burn through this. It's a big game, to be fair. If you're going to play it, you need to put time aside for it. But yeah, the remaster for that, I would just say from a visual standpoint and what it added technically, was justifiable. You only had to pay a couple of quid to upgrade it.
It was only about a tenner, wasn't it?
I think so I kept my disc copy, so I only had to pay a small amount for the upgrade. And I would say it's worth it. If you've never played it before and you have a PlayStation 5, jump in with the PlayStation 5 version because it's
it does appeal to a weird thing that I have with games where if you give me a really boring, monotonous task to do.
Agreed. Every now and again it's needed. I just find it very therapeutic because there's nothing in this world other than the sound of the world.
Yeah.
And just you trudging along. Very occasionally these quite beautiful pieces of music will kick in at key story points. So there's like a group called Low Roar that have some of their music in the game. So it's very selective about when it's usually when you discover a new place, so this music will kick in, but otherwise it's just this feeling of being completely outdoors, isolated, but still people are sort of there but you don't see them. It's just a strangely engaging, there's some people hated it and I can completely understand why, but it clicked with me and I really liked it. So revisiting that last year I felt was a really nice change of pace.
Did you ever play Shenmue on the Dreamcast?
No, I didn't personally, but I know I've seen it played several times. You know
the bit towards the end of the first Shenmue game where you're working the warehouse with the forklift truck?
Yes, I do.
Death Stranding kind of, on paper, reminded me of that just monotony of doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, and doing it well, because you get graded for your delivery.
Oh, even better.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So
fantastic.
You have to consider things such as the time fall, which is a form of rain which ages things and people. So what you don't want to be out in the time fall because it will damage your packages.
Right.
And it will also, it just makes things harder. Like things will depreciate and things will, like bridges and things that people have left behind will start to decay. So the idea is if you get caught in time fall on your skin, it ages your skin. So if you get caught in it without any protection, I mean, you always have protection when you're playing the game, but there's key scenes where people are caught out in the rain and they age to the point of death. You just watch this. So there's there's a strong, it's kind of like, have you ever seen the Indiana Jones film where he drinks from the wrong goblet and he ages, but it's like that. And there's this quite compelling horror element to it as well, which is what again makes me think I'd really love Hideo Kojima to make a horror game. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a Kojima fan. I never have been, but this does sound up my alley in many ways.
If you haven't played it, I'd really give it a go and put some time aside for it because it is a big one. But equally, I would say it's something you could put aside, go to something else, and then come back to it later.
Right.
Because I'm not going to lie, I don't think the story is all that interesting. Like it's interesting, but that wasn't what kept me going.
It's more the gameplay loop.
100%. Yeah. There were certain elements of the story I found interesting, but overall, I was just a bit, and it was more just because I was a bit like, okay, you can't help, but you can see the Kojima tangents coming a mile off to the point where you kind of go, okay, we're doing that now.
That's almost how I am with the Atelier franchise. The stories are always very it's very serviceable tropes of RPGs, particularly JRPGs. It's always a cute girl who's an alchemist, who's doing her thing, and then there's some sort of threat. She has to save the world, whatever. But it's the gameplay loop that is so utterly addicting.
I mean, I wouldn't even necessarily say that Death Stranding story beats a trike, because it's an interesting story. And I think by the end of the story, I was like, actually, you know what? It was good. It's moving. But I never felt that my desire to keep pushing forward was motivated by learning more of the story.
Figuring out what happens next.
Because it was just kind of like, oh, we're doing this now. Okay, cool. And there were certain characters that resonated with me more than others. So if we were sticking with one or two characters, which you do for sort of the middle of it, I was a bit like, okay. But I think by the time it gets into that third act, there is the interaction between a couple of core characters is actually quite moving, and it's really nice. But
it starts to hit its stride a bit more.
It does, yeah, 100%. It's a game of sort of 3 sections. The beginning is really good, I think, when things get going. The middle part of it, there's a section which, if you've played it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, where it's just drudgery, unnecessary, meaningless drudgery, and then it picks up again and sort of comes back into its own. So yeah, that was a highlight for me, just because of the utilization of the PlayStation technology.
It just adds that bit extra.
Yeah, it does.
I don't want that to sound like it. It's not a lot, because it actually, on paper, it's not a lot.
Well, they've obviously done something quite a lot. I mean, obviously, it's upgraded to a solid 60 frames per second now, which is stunning. It's a beautiful game. That can't be understated how gorgeous this game is. And like I said, a game which compelled you to make so much use of certain buttons on the controller. You've now got that sort of oddly... I like that they've added a bit more to it with the haptic feedback trigger, because there's just something about that level of detail that I really like.
It's just additional immersion.
Exactly. It's just effort was made with this remake, with this upgrade. That's all I say. It's not just a 60 frames per second.
It's not just an up-res, no.
No, it's a solid next generation version of the game. So if you have got the disc copy, and I think Director's Cut version is probably being discounted several times by now. If you're inclined to go back to it, I would give it a go. I think it's definitely worth a punt for the price of entry.
That's back on my pile of shame then.
Yeah, I think I'm curious to see what you would think of it, because I think yours and my opinions of Kojima's games overall has been we've come to it from very different places. Yeah. I find it easier to get on board with a lot more of the eccentricity and the bonkers tangents of the games than you do.
To be honest,
Metal Gear is what we're talking about.
Bonkers tangents are fine. It was kind of the more historical stuff with Metal Gear. Like, I got through the first 2 Metal Gear games.
Oh, the revisionist history of Metal Gear Solid is hilarious.
It's just the 30 minutes of cutscenes about some government garbage that I don't care about. I'm just like, when do I get to shoot something else?
Well, I find it quite fun. I mean, I would assume what you're talking about is Snake Eater.
No, all of them I found that.
Well, Snake Eater is particularly apparent because it kind of creates that fantasy what if of the General Secretary of the Soviet Union and the American president discussing Big Boss. Do you know what I mean? It very much inserts itself into history quite flagrantly, like the idea that his character, the boss,
actually existed.
Yes, and was the hero single-handedly of World War II, which is quite an audacious claim. So
yeah.
I just find there's something so charming about those games, and I love them. Like Metal Gear is that's always like the top 5 games of all time ever. I don't think Metal Gear will ever leave that list for me. The first 3 particularly.
1 and 2. I loved,
yes,
based on the gameplay alone, but I was skipping those cutscenes like a bitch because they just go on so long, and the content is not exciting to me.
Metal Gear 1's, I think Metal Gear 1 is a very difficult one to skip through, though. I think I
found it very easy.
No, I find Metal Gear 1 is probably arguably Metal Gear 1 and 2. I think I can't skip through any of that stuff.
I'm going to say something so offensive to you now.
What?
The Twin Snakes was exactly what I needed to get through.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think the Twin Snakes is garbage.
Yeah.
Irredeemable garbage.
Yeah.
I hate that game.
It cut the cutscenes down by about 90% and turned them into the Matrix. That's something I can get on board with.
Yeah. I can see the appeal.
Do you know what I mean?
Can, and that's the thing. Because I was so fond of those elements it cut out, for me, it was like taking the Bible and pissing on it.
The Twin Snakes, in terms of how it tells its narrative, is almost the antithesis to the original.
It is 100%.
Which is why so many people hated it, but it's why I loved it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I can completely understand that. If you found those kinds of, because they're very melodramatic as well. Can't be understated how melodramatic Metal Gear can be.
Yeah.
So it does cut a lot of that out.
Why are we even talking about
I was going to say, we've literally got a tangent about Metal Gear, which came out 25 years ago the other day, which made me feel a bit sick. So we should probably rein that back in.
Yes.
And then what else do we have on this list? Let's get into what should have been the meat and potatoes of the episode, I think, which is the most divisive game on this list for an interesting reason.
It's not divisive in that we both have the exact same opinion of it.
It's divisive in the sense that it is simultaneously a brilliant and shit game.
Yeah.
And that is Resident Evil Village.
Resident Evil Village. A game of 2 halves.
A game of 2 halves, indeed. And it is a game that I actually had no intention of bothering with at all. I didn't. I bought it on the day it came out, like after I'd seen, because I had no interest in playing it, because I just kind of really fallen off Resident Evil with Resident Evil 7. I loved the remake of Resident Evil 2. I loved that game. I still think as a remake goes, it doesn't surpass the original, but it is a brilliant game in its own regard. I hated Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. That really let it down. So by this point, I was kind of like, I've actually had a bit of a guts full of Resident Evil now. It's simultaneously given me and taken away and all this. So I was a bit like... So the fact it was going back to the Resident Evil 7 form, which I wasn't a fan of, to be honest.
It never massively appealed to either of us, did it?
It was a good horror game for the first half, and it's another one. That's another one where the first half of it is a perfectly serviceable horror game. I think it's a bad Resident Evil game, and the second half of it is just dog shit.
And this has been a very, very common thread with kind of the more modern Resident Evil games. I think from 4 onwards,
they
start off really well.
Yeah.
And then the wheels just come off like halfway, 2/3 of the way through.
It's like they lose the confidence of their convictions with it. Because, and we'll go straight into just talking about Village, which is the first half of Village is brilliant.
Yes.
It sets up this wonderful setting, atmosphere, characters, and it manages to maintain. And one notable point of it is I think it is the only game that has used that kind of Outlast run and chase format well.
With
in
any
the
success.
sense that it only lasts for about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Because it knows that mechanic really outstays its welcome really quickly.
Oh, Lord.
You just can't make full games like that are complete successes. I'm sorry, you can't. So it uses it to perfection. And that sequence is arguably the most effective sequence in the whole game. The first time you play it, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's really, really terrifying.
Yeah.
And then you've got the castle with obviously Lady Dimitrescu and her daughters. So it's that very kind of the old Resident Evil in the castle with the weird puzzles, that very gothic feel. And the idea that you're being hunted by them all the time as well. Atmospherically and in terms of tone, it's perfect. And then obviously the bit at the beginning where you're wandering around in the village as well. You don't really know what's going on. The village is empty. You get with the group of the villagers who are being attacked by the Lycans. Everything about it is just like brilliant. This is horror again. This is a really good...
And it's a new take on Resident Evil as well, because Resident Evil before Village has only ever really flirted with the idea of kind of the supernatural almost.
Yeah.
It's always been very tangible threats. It's always been, and I know this is still some kind of virus and whatnot.
But it does, so especially with going back again to the Beneviento house, obviously it is all supposed to be to do with the mold, isn't it?
Yeah.
But equally, it does kind of allow for that little flourish into the supernatural.
More than a little flourish, my God.
I mean, you could argue that it's kind of it's the effect of the mold poisoning the mind, but either way, it works. It's really, really, that whole sequence is actually quite distressing.
Like the Beneviento?
The Beneviento house.
God.
It's horrible. Because that enemy is truly vile. It's a screaming baby that's just, it's horrible. I can't even really begin to describe what it is. I mean, it is a baby.
It's just a huge baby.
And there's a big umbilical cord that's wandering out the door.
And
it's very Silent Hill, actually.
Crying
it's very Silent Hill, I would say.
It's absolutely Silent Hill. I get much more Silent Hill from the first half of Village than I do Resident Evil.
I agree.
But I'm very happy about that.
But it reminded me a lot of Silent Hill 3 because there's a lot of that weirdness about birth, umbilical cords, babies, and all this kind of, and you're just like,
no.
Oh.
Very unpleasant. Very effective.
But that's it. The first half of the game, I think, is actually perfect. It's brilliant. And then it leaves the Beneviento house and then it goes to the...
kind of the marsh area.
The marsh area, which is kind of this old wooden village. And that's when you can... Because the way I would describe villages is it feels like a greatest hits.
Yeah.
So the first half of it is a mansion, which is the old school Resident Evil formula. The Beneviento house is a bit of its own thing, but it still very much stays with the idea of Resident Evil as a horror game.
And it's almost not even really its own section, is it? It's more of a detour.
Agreed, because it's a very short section.
It's the shortest section by far.
It's a refreshingly short section. But then what it does is it then changes tact very quickly in that it basically turns into Resident Evil 4.
/5.
Because you've got that thing in the fucking water that's coming after you, which is basically just the beginning of the boat.
Just the environment. It really
There's a tonal shift. There's a total tonal shift.
Yeah.
And then the last half of it, which is my least favourite part of it, which is in the factory, is Resident Evil 5. And there's a section in the factory in Resident Evil 5 which is no fun to play, from what I can remember.
And this is the thing. This is what I meant when I said about kind of the more modern Resident Evil games. They start off really strong. Mm-hmm. And they start off really strong because they lean into the horror. Yeah. You had the village in Resident Evil 4. You had the other village in Resident Evil 5.
Biohazard or Resident Evil 7 is a grindhouse horror. It's a grindhouse horror story.
And then it almost gets to a point where Capcom goes, okay, we've done too much of this. Mm-hmm. It's been too quiet. We need to amp up the action.
And then it just shits the bed.
And it just shits the bed completely.
Totally.
Every
it just
time.
takes everything. It's like, just have the courage of your convictions to stay with this, because this is what made your fucking franchise popular in the first place. There's enough of these action kinds of games around. There always has been. There's never been a shortage or whatever of these
Resident
games.
Evil 4 is a classic example. You know, between the village, the castle with the cult in it and everything, that was so good. Mm-hmm. And then you get to a point where it's like, okay, so now we're going to turn it into Gears of War for no reason.
But that's the thing. It annoys the fuck out of me, because I understand that it's a really tough subject for me, Resident Evil overall, because it is a game and a franchise that I love. Mm-hmm. But there are more games in that franchise that I don't like than I do.
Yeah.
Like, I think Code Veronica is a better game than Resident Evil 4.
I agree.
It's one of those things to me where I understand that Resident Evil 4 had to exist, otherwise Resident Evil would probably be dead.
Be dead, yeah. Absolutely.
Resident Evil 5, I think, is actually better for me than Resident Evil 4, because I loved playing it in co-op with you. As a single-player game, it wasn't good, but as a co-op, loved it.
Resident Evil 5 is a weird one because...
6 is terrible. That's universally acknowledged. It's terrible.
5 is a weird one because I played the shit out of it, and not just in co-op with you.
No, I know. You played it. You platinumed it pretty much, I remember. And did it on Xbox 360 as well.
Yeah, but now I'm like, in the rearview mirror...
It's not a great game.
It's a shit
but
game.
It's a really good co-op game, I would say. I think at the time, anyway, I've gone back to it recently, and I think the controls and whatnot have aged badly. But at the time, we had a blast playing that in co-op.
I mean, we even had a blast playing 6 in co-op.
We did, and it was just because it was so stupid.
We were going through it going, this is really
This
bad.
dog shit.
This is really
like, how do we unlock the mercenaries mode? And then that was it.
And the mercenaries mode was shit as well.
The mercenaries mode was fun. But that's the thing, is it just... I understand that series have to evolve, and I understand they have to bring in new elements and whatever else, because you do have to keep expanding your player base because things change. But Capcom, to me, just never seem to keep an eye on the prize in terms of this is what made your franchise popular in the first place. If you want a two-a-penny action game, there are hundreds of those out there to play. Horror games don't come around. Good horror games don't come around very often.
No.
And I think the constant push-pull aspect with Capcom for me is what annoys the fuck out of me, is because Resident Evil 2 Remake was so good.
Yeah.
Because it never took its eye off the ball that it was a horror game.
Exactly what we wanted from a Resident Evil game.
It was a consistent start-to-finish horror game that was thick with atmosphere. It upgraded the second one in arguably all the ways it needed to bring it into the 21st century.
Yeah.
The B scenarios are still a bone of contention between the two of us, and it's the only thing to me that stops it from being damn near perfect.
Me too.
So to me, when I played that, I was like, Capcom is back. They know what they're doing. This is exactly what they're doing. So Resident Evil 3 Nemesis comes out, and I'm like, this is shit.
I didn't dislike it as much as you did.
It's undercooked. It's lazy. It's rushed. Like, nobody asked for that game to come out 12 months after the second one. It needed another 2 years of dev time, and it would have been great, I think. And then RE Village comes out, and I'm like, okay, so we're going back to the Resident Evil 7 formula, which was... So I'm like, do you know what? I'm out. And then I think you said you played it, and something in it just made me think, all right, I'm going to play it. And then for the first half of it, I was like, this is fucking brilliant, actually. I'll eat my hat. This is fantastic. And then I got to that second half of it, and I was like...
Oh, we're back to this.
Okay.
Yeah.
And to be honest, the first time I didn't hate it because I was on such a high from that first half that I kind of just, pushed through it.
Let it go. Yeah.
And then when I played it again, I was like, this second half of this game is actually shit.
Yeah.
It's really not very good. The first half is brilliant. It's really, really good. Like, I would have just happily had a whole game that was set in that castle.
It's
with
just
a bit of that Beneviento house in there as well.
It's the same pattern over and over. It starts off great, and then they just lose faith in the direction they're going.
They just try consistently and constantly to appeal to too many different people at once.
Yeah.
Resident Evil 6 is the worst example of it, but But either that, it's just I can't even really describe what goes wrong in Resident Evil 7, in the sense that Resident Evil 7 is just, like I said, I don't think it's a good Resident Evil game. In fact, I think it's a terrible Resident Evil game, but it's a good horror game.
Yeah.
And the first half of it with the house and the disgusting people that you come into contact, I mean, the less said about Marguerite Baker, the better.
Oh, grim.
The fact
Especially attacking you with her vagina.
The fact that woman's vagina is basically her primary weapon against you will never stop haunting me, to be honest. And you get it flush in the face.
Oh, yeah.
Like, a few times. It's not good. It's a good horror game, and there's a lot of thrills to it, and it's fun. And then you get onto that container ship, which starts to show you Mia's backstory.
Mia's a terrible character as well.
Mia's an awful character. And so is Ethan.
Ethan's okay, particularly in Village. I think fine.
They give him a bit more agency in Village, which I like. He was just supposed to be a completely useless, like,
a faithless thing
in 7. But Mia is a fucking awful character.
She's terrible.
Terrible character. I will never understand why people like Mia so much.
Does anyone like Mia?
They do.
Oh.
Yeah.
I
remember the first time I played Resident Evil 7, I chose the Baker daughter to give the cure to instead of Mia.
Absolutely.
I was like, and she was righteous, admittedly she were married, but she was fuming about it and went mental. I was like, do you know what? Actually, this is your fault. You caused this. She's trying to get me out of it. And I'm like, and you have done nothing to endear yourself to me for the last couple of hours. You cut my hand off. Your droning, horrible voice has ruined most of my time when you've been on screen. So I'm like, you better believe that I've sided with Zoe Baker.
And the joke is, obviously Mia is in Village as well.
And she's awful in Village.
She's worse.
She's
in
worse
Village.
in Village.
I was like, she's a twat.
Bit of an asshole. Yeah. And I'm like, do you know what? I understand the whole... It's kind of... It reminded me a bit... Saying about Silent Hill. The whole dad throwing himself into the fire to save the baby thing. It's very Harry Mason.
Yeah.
But Mia can get in the bin.
Absolutely.
I genuinely hope we never hear from Mia Winter again.
Did she survive? She did. Didn't she? Oh,
but the fact that they seem to set the prologue up as the daughter being... That's what's making me think, I just don't want this to continue. I really don't.
The daughter did look more interesting to me.
But even still, I'm just like, I wish they would just put this to bed.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, but then I know I'm in the wrong here. I'm like, just go back to doing what you did before.
How are you in the wrong with that?
Well, because everyone will just say, oh, well, you just want the same game rehashed over and over and over.
Absolutely, that's what I want. And I have no shame in that.
I just want basically the quality and the character and the consistency of Resident Evil 2 Remake. Make those games.
Yeah. Make
a new Resident Evil game in that vein.
Yeah.
That's what
it's interesting, actually, when I think about the first kind of half of the series timeline, like starting with the very first Resident Evil on PS1 up to the GameCube remake and 0.
Oh, no, I think the remake of RE1 is still the best game in the whole franchise.
But those games, up to that point, I would want to say the number of playthroughs would be in 3 digits.
100%. And there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
There's a very good reason for it.
But Biohazard and Village... I have played once each.
I played Biohazard about 3 times. 2 of those were for stream, and to be honest, I didn't enjoy them. And I've played Village. I've played Village a few times because I was originally going for platinum, and then I realised just how much I really didn't like the second half of the game. So I was like, nah.
I have put it on to play it again both times.
I kind of like that. I can't remember is it called Mercenaries in this version?
Yeah.
That's kind of fun.
It was okay.
But it equally was very tedious at the same time. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's
just no replay value.
But Resident Evil Remake, second of the remake, that's a game I've played in triple figures.
Yeah.
Without a shadow of a doubt. The amount of playthroughs I've got for that. I mean, you and I can S+ that on hardcore like the back of our hand.
I got it down to a fine art.
I had it down to a fine art. That's a game I could go back to again and again and again. It's just beat for beat perfect for what it is. That to me is where Resident Evil should be, should stay, and that's what you should be aiming for. That's the trajectory I really was hoping Resident Evil was going to go with from that remake. So in that respect, Village was always going to be a bit of a disappointment, but the first half of it, as I said, is brilliant. The second half, I think, is shit.
Yeah.
It really, because I think it arguably kills off its best characters in that first half and leaves you with characters that are not particularly interesting.
Yeah.
The guy in the
Van Helsing guy.
Yeah, what's his name?
I can't remember.
Heisenberg.
Heisenberg
is a fan favourite. People love Heisenberg. I just never really clicked with him.
Lady D was the best character.
Lady D was the best character in the whole thing.
She was.
I'm sorry, that was mostly down to the performance by Maggie Robertson, who deserves every award that she's received. And the 3 daughters. That whole thing, it's just brilliant. I
felt like Lady D was a Metal Gear Solid 2 Snake and Ride and Red Herring.
Yes.
Because she was in all the material.
And I think that was a bit of a... Because a lot of people were like, oh. But then I will say this with total confidence, that character's coming back. I believe that character will come back. I don't think Capcom realised what they had until
they'll find a way.
They'll find a way to bring that back.
I almost feel like they should have switched Mother Miranda with Lady D.
Agreed. I agree, 100%. There is no doubt in my mind that Lady Dimitrescu will be back just because of how much the fans loved that character.
Yeah.
And they know they've got Maggie Robertson on speed dial. She'll do it. If you phone her up and said, you fancy another turn at this? Yep.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that the DLC, if and when it ever does actually materialise, is more single-player content that's geared towards that half of the story.
It'll just be new mercenaries maps or something.
I know it will be, but I would just want more. I would love more than that, but you're right. It is just going to be mercenaries maps and mounted other crap.
We can't have nice things.
We can't have nice things, but yeah, I've got no doubt that Lady D is going to become some sort of pseudo-Wesker character in the future of the franchise.
Yeah.
No doubt in my mind. Next time she's going to appear as some kind of re-embodied... It's going to be like Meredith Stout from Cyberpunk 2077. She's going to be working for Umbrella in this fabulous suit. She's going to be brought firmly into the 21st
Still going to be like
century.
9 feet tall.
100%.
That would be so
smoking
funny.
Behind a desk. That's what she's going to be an Umbrella suit.
In a pencil skirt.
It'd be her, Ada Wong, and who, I don't know, the Wesker sister that came into the weird half of those games, Just what a dream team. Can you imagine? The energy on screen would just be too much. But yeah, I've got total confidence that character is coming back.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, I've got no doubt about it. And if they don't, I think they're mad. I think
fools.
Throwing something away there. But overall, 2021, I think, was a good year.
It was a good year.
There was some standout games. I think it was a slower year than what we're looking at this year.
This is the thing. 2021 was a good year for games. 2022, I think, is going to be better, and it's already off to a flying start. But that's a story for another day.
So just to finish, then, what would you say was the absolute highlight of 2021 for you?
For me,
yeah. By a tiny, tiny, tiny margin, I'm going to say that it was Mass Effect Legendary Edition. I want to say it's Hitman, but then I think when I say Hitman, I'm looking at Hitman as the complete package.
Yeah.
Hitman 3 is in isolation, just about loses out to Mass Effect Legendary Edition. So I would say Mass Effect was the
same. I agree.
Was the highlight. I think. Yeah. Just in terms of going back to that world again, it was a joy.
Just fabulous, and for it to, I think it was such a moment for us because we went into it very gingerly. Mm-hmm. But
it was the total opposite of the GTA situation. The total opposite of the GTA.
We thought it was going to be a disaster.
I don't think I'd have recovered from it if it had been a disaster.
I would have been devastated. I would have been genuinely devastated.
If they'd have let that go like that, I would have been devastated. And like we said in our episode, I think Mass Effect 4 may have ended up being quietly shelved if it hadn't have done well.
Oh, yeah. That wouldn't have seen the light of day.
Whereas now I'm thinking, actually, Mass Effect 4's in the pipes.
What a time to be alive.
We can be... cautiously optimistic on that one, I think. So stay tuned for that in the future.
So for now, that's 2021 wrapped.
Our next episode will be talking about 2022, including some of the stuff we have already played.
Which is, to be honest, most of it. Most of the stuff on my list is already stuff. I've finished one of them.
Yeah, and then there's a couple of other things coming up, so it might probably be a shorter one, the next one. And
we say that every time, and it's never
well, at least one of those games I would like to do a whole episode on. So we'll do in fact, I think most of them we'll probably end up doing a whole episode on. I think maybe 2 of them. Cyberpunk for sure I would like to do a whole episode on because there's loads I'd love to talk about with Cyberpunk, and then I think Elden Ring maybe. So we'll wrap it up there then, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Yes, thank you very much for listening if you did.
Thank you, and find us on the socials, which you can usually find below. We are on most major platforms now.
Jen and Fenn Pod, look it up.
Lovely. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
And goodbye.
Bye.